"We have to get him to hospital now," the paramedic said again, and in a blur of movement they lifted the stretcher into the back of the ambulance, slammed the doors shut and drove away, siren blaring. Edward turned to Daisy. "What did he tell you? Who did this?" The detective inspector addressed me instead. "Mr. Sullivan, do you know anything about an old man? In his 60s or 70s. Bald head. Blue eyes. Romanian. Does that mean anything to you?" I stared at her, bewildered. "Ion told us this is who attacked him. An old man, speaking Romanian. Did this old man say anything to him?" "He said, 'Do you remember me?' But Ion didn't. He swears he's never seen him before." "And you asked Ion about Oscar?" Edward Said. "Of course I did. It was the first thing we asked him. He didn't know anything about it. And I believe him. He's been lying there for hours. None of these three can have anything to do with Oscar Tranham's disappearance. Except." Daisy cut him off. "Go home, both of you. Leave it to the professionals." She pointed a finger at me. "And you, stay home, don't go anywhere. It seems like everyone in this fucked up case is connected to you. I'm going to want to talk to you later." She marched off towards the house, a dozen camera phones flashing around her. Chapter 54. Putrescent, 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 putrescent. Laura sat in the back of the devil's car, baby Oscar asleep in her lap, his little head resting against her chest. Alina sat beside her, staring out the window at the cars passing on the motorway. The devil was driving, his eyes, those cold, hooded eyes, glancing at them every so often in the rear-view mirror. Alina was, Laura noticed, wearing her seat belt. Which was surely strange behavior for a ghost. Had this devil given Alina human form, granted her a new body in which to walk the earth again? Laura wanted to reach out and touch the Romanian woman, to see if she was warm or cold, but was too afraid. Putrescent, putrescent, putrescent. She thought back to earlier, replaying what had happened. She found it hard to connect to any of it. It was like she was watching herself on a movie screen from a great distance. Playing it back, it was easy to believe that she was an actress, playing a part in a strange, scary movie. But then Oscar would squirm against her and she would remember, this was real. And she couldn't withdraw into herself, pretend it wasn't happening. Because she had her best friend's baby with her. As if reading her mind, Oscar opened his eyes and focused on her, oblivious, trusting. Innocent. She had to keep it together. Not for herself, but for him. At about 4:30, the devil had dropped her back at Aaron and Rob's house after rescuing her from the crazed Romanian woman. In the garden, she had spoken to Alina, telling her what had happened. Alina had asked a lot of questions about the woman and the old man. Especially the old man. Laura wasn't certain, but Alina appeared scared. Could a ghost feel fear? Then Laura had heard Aaron calling her and gone inside. She realized now that she had neglected to lock the back door. Aaron told Laura that she and Rob were about to die of tiredness and could Laura watch Oscar for an hour while they took a nap. Of course she agreed. Her friends went to their room and she watched Oscar sleeping in his cot for a while, sitting in the chair by his side, trying not to think about what had happened earlier, trying to decide if she should call Daniel. She knew she should, but he thought she was crazy. He wouldn't believe her when she told him the devil had saved her. She imagined him calling her parents, and her mum turning up with a doctor. A doctor who would take her away to a hospital and give her pills and put her to sleep. She would rather take her chances here, with the devil and the ghost of a murdered woman outside, than go to a hospital. What happened next? She had smelt something sweet. Oscar had filled his nappy. She wanted to help her friends, to allow them more than an hour's sleep. If she could change Oscar's nappy without waking him. She had seen Aaron do it, knew what to do. But the nappies and wipes were in the living room. With a last look at the deeply sleeping baby, she crept out of the nursery to the living room. When she got back, he wasn't in the cot. She tried not to panic. Aaron or Rob must have come to get him. She ran down to the kitchen, expecting to find one of her friends there with their baby. Instead, she found the back door standing open. And just outside stood the devil, with Alina beside him. The devil was holding little Oscar. Laura looked from him to Alina. The ghost was immobile, no expression in her eyes. So ghosts could feel fear. It made sense, a ghost would be afraid of the devil. Laura could hear her own heartbeat, ba boom ba boom ba boom. The devil spoke in his soft but deep voice. Come with me. Laura opened her mouth. If you scream, or make any noise at all, I will kill the baby. He wouldn't be the first. He walked off towards the gate, holding Oscar in one arm, his other hand gripping Alina's wrist, pulling her along. Laura followed, realizing she was still holding the nappies and baby wipes. Once they were in the car, the devil said, just so we are clear, any attempt to get away, and I will kill the baby. A little while later, he pulled over and watched Laura while she changed Oscar on the back seat. Oscar woke up, and made that little bleating noise he made when he was tired or hungry. The newborn baby poo smelled sweet, like sugary milk, and the devil told her to pass him the dirty nappy. He got out of the car for a minute, to put the nappy in the boot. Laura whispered to Alina, what's he going to do with us? With Oscar. Alina trembled. Her eyes were wide open but, Laura was sure, she wasn't seeing Laura or the interior of the car. What could she see? The inside of the house where she died. Had she met the devil there? I've been watching all of you, he said, getting back into the driver's seat. It's been most entertaining. You know, I love young people. So sure you know best, certain that you know how the world works. Looking with pity, or indifference, at people my age. Laura was confused. These were strange words for the devil to speak. You still have so much to learn. He grinned again. So very much. At one point, on the motorway, Oscar, who had fallen asleep as they left London and entered Essex, had woken up and cried out, rubbing his head against Laura's chest, searching futilely for her nipple. He cried out and Laura shushed him, wished she had something for him to drink. He's hungry, she said. The devil laughed. There's milk at the house. We'll be there soon. In the meantime, keep him quiet. He looked at her in the mirror again, then at Alina. I only need one of you. You would do well to remember that. I only need one of you to start again. Beside her, Alina began to cry. Laura was startled. Alina. Crying. She reached out instinctively to comfort the dead woman and was shocked to find her hand making contact with warm flesh. Chapter 55. We got back into Edward's car and sat in silence for a moment. I felt curiously calm. Many times in my working life I have encountered a nasty problem, a piece of code, an element of design or user-friendliness, and worried myself into a frenzy of stress, only for a tranquil sensation to come over me. There is always a solution that can be found through logic and clear thought. The police didn't know Laura. I did. Surely this placed me in a better position than them to find her and Oscar. I was also the only person, apart from Edward, who knew the whole story. I explained this to Edward. He raised both eyebrows. Except we don't know the whole story, do we? Who is the old man? I don't know. Let me think. I tapped my forehead, speaking aloud to aid my thought process. We thought Ion and Camelia had taken Laura and the baby so they could blackmail us into telling them what we'd done with the drugs. But we now know that isn't the case. A pause. Ion said he didn't know where Alina is. Maybe he was telling the truth. Edward hung his head from what I assumed to be exhaustion. I didn't feel tired at all. My body hummed with adrenaline. I hadn't felt like this for a long time. Since emerging from the forest that night 3 months ago, I had been confused, anxious, unable to think straight. A week ago, faced by this situation, my impulse would have been to hit the bottle, hide away and hope for the best. But I felt absolute certainty. This fucked up situation, this mess, this horror story, had started with me, with a single unwitting mistake I'd made back then, choosing not to buy the more expensive sleeper tickets. That decision had set everything else in motion. Now I had a chance to redeem myself. Something had been germinating at the back of my mind since Edward had discovered Alina was alive and in London. I had never considered the possibility that the man from the house would try to find Laura or me. But now that I knew that Ion had followed and found us, it made me think. Had someone else followed us too? Or maybe Alina was here. She had seemingly escaped. And, my mind whirred through the problem, her abductor had followed her. Killing Constantine en route. The timing of the man's disappearance was too perfect for me to believe anything else. I had believed from the very beginning that Constantine was corrupt, that he already knew about the house, which was why we'd fled Briva. Constantine had gone missing at the same time all the weird stuff had started to happen here. But what had occurred over in Romania? Did Constantine try to save Alina? Had Alina killed the policeman? Whatever the answer, the fact that Constantine had vanished just before Alina appeared in London made me think it couldn't be a coincidence. And when she escaped, the man holding her prisoner had come after her. And today, everything was coming to a head. He had killed Camelia, left Ion for dead, then grabbed Laura and, I presumed, Alina, taking Oscar too. Edward started to ask me something but I held up my hand. I needed to think. There was one problem with this theory, the man we'd seen in the house had not been old, according to Ion's description. He'd been in his 30s. But perhaps he had an accomplice. Someone who already lived here. Or someone he had sent over. Call your police contact in Romania, I said. I think I know why the house is empty now. I explained my theory. I don't know. Single quote. Do it, Edward. He looked surprised by my new assertiveness. We need to know who lived in that house. As the private investigator called the number, I watched the squat, though it was difficult to see much thanks to the crowd of rubberneckers outside. Another ambulance had arrived and I watched them carry out Camela's body. An image flashed in my head, Camelia on top of me on my sofa, blood streaking her half-naked body, the top of her skull caved in. I shuddered and closed my eyes, forcing the image away. I listened as Edward spoke to the English-speaking police officer in Briva, impatient to know what was being said at the other end of the line. Edward made a note on a piece of paper, said, "Okay," a few times, then ended the call. Well. He wanted to know why we are asking, so I told him your idea, that this abductor and murderer, who the police over there don't even believe exists, had come to London. And what did he say? He said that they'd managed to find out who owns the house. Or rather, who owned it. He held up the sheet of paper on which he'd jotted the name. Nicolae Gabor. You said owned. He's dead. Disappeared, presumed dead. Apparently, he was a policeman during the years of communist rule. My new friend in Briva said Gabor had something of a reputation. When I asked him for more details, he told me to look him up on Google. But they are going on the assumption that Gabor owned the house but never lived there, and when he disappeared it was just left to rot. An abandoned house in the forest. I had already taken out my phone and typed Nicolae Gabor into Google. I quickly found his name on a page called Villains of Communist Romania. The page, which contained a long list of crimes against the people, was in Romanian, so I pasted the web address into Google Translate. According to this, he was a member of the Securitate, the secret police. I read aloud, amending the slightly garbled translation as I went along. Like many of his comrades, Gabor was vicious and corrupt, using his high rank in the terror he induced in ordinary people to amass a personal fortune. Following the revolution, a number of women came forward to claim that Gabor had raped and abused them, that he ordered his underlings to use the fear of rape as a tool to intimidate whole families. A real charmer, Edward deadpanned. I carried on reading aloud. After abortion was made illegal after 1966, many of the children fathered by Gabor and his squad of rapists were sent to the country's terrible orphanages where they suffered appalling cruelty. There was a link to a page about Romanian orphanages during the communist era. I had read about these places before, just a paragraph in my Eastern Europe guidebook. I had tried to read the section aloud to Laura, the terrible facts about children tied to the bars of their cots, the systematic abuse and neglect, but after a few lines she had tears rolling down her cheeks, and I had to stop reading. It was too awful to think about. But it echoed what we had seen in that house, with a sickening twist. This time the mothers were chained up, emaciated, the babies relatively healthy and well looked after. The baby we had seen, anyway. We had no idea what had happened to the others, like the poor soul in that tiny coffin. After the revolution, Gabor disappeared. He is assumed to have been murdered by one of his former victims seeking revenge. But no body was ever found. I lifted my eyes from the screen. But he didn't die. He moved to that house and carried on raping women, getting them pregnant. Except he's not the man you saw there, is he? He's too old. According to the web page, Gabor would be 70 now. I shook my head. The man we saw must have been an accomplice. Is there a photo of Gabor? Edward asked. There was no photo on the page I'd been looking at, so I went back to Google and submitted the search again. There was nothing immediately obvious. I'm going to head over to see Sophie, check how she is, Edward sighed. I'll drop you at home on the way. But I don't want to go home. I need to be out here, looking. He ignored me and started the engine. There's nothing more we can do at the moment, Daniel. We need to leave it to the police. No. I want to go to the hospital, to talk to Ion. I need to know more about this old man. He asked Ion if he remembered him. Maybe I can jog his memory with this information about Gabor. Maybe Ion knows where to find him. But there's no way the police will let you see him. We don't even know if he's still alive. I don't care. I'm still paying you, aren't I? As we were arguing, I continued to flick through results pages on the search engine. Another result caught my eye. In pictures, the men of the Securitate. I clicked on the link and waited for the page to load, then scrolled down. There were numerous photos of men wearing secret police uniforms, frowning at the camera. Halfway down the page was a shot of Nikolai Gabor taken in the late 80s, shortly before the Velvet Revolution. He was quite handsome, with a strong jawline. He glared at the camera, clearly unhappy to have his photo taken. As he stared out of the photo, I stared back. It felt like he was looking right at me. Into me. And as I stared at the photo, I recognized him. I'd seen him before. Chapter 56. We pulled into the hospital car parked 20 minutes later. I asked Edward to let me lead and he nodded his agreement. At the back of my mind I knew I was heading for an adrenaline crash, that soon my body would notice that I hadn't eaten anything all day. But for now I was riding that chemical wave. I wasn't entirely sure how we were going to locate Ion, but as we entered the lobby I spotted the female police officer who'd been at the squat. I followed her at a discreet distance as she walked towards the lift, Edward a few steps behind me. The lift arrived and as she got in I hurried closer, saw her press the button for the 4th floor. The stairwell was located beside the lifts, so I ran up the stairs to the 4th floor without waiting for the private investigator. I didn't feel at all out of breath when I reached the top, just in time to see the policewoman press another button just down the hall and wait to be buzzed in through a set of double doors. I followed, pressing the red button and waiting to be admitted. An Asian nurse let me through but then stepped in front of me. Visiting hours finished an hour ago, she said. I'm police, I replied, using my authoritative voice. There is no great trick to getting people to believe a lie. You simply have to sound convincing. In this case, it also helps if you act like you are going to be aggressive towards anyone who gets in your way. I'm here to see Ion. Single quote. I trailed off, realizing that I still didn't know his second name. The stabbing victim. It's urgent. Oh, yes. Single quote. She hesitated. Shit. She was about to ask to see my badge. So much for fooling her with my authoritative air. But then another nurse appeared and called her, used the word urgent, and the Asian nurse hurried after her. Nurse, which bed? I called. 40, she replied as she vanished around the corner. Edward's face appeared at the door and I buzzed him through. Bed 40, I said. If anyone asks, we're police. What? Oh, I see. We walked through the ward, searching for bed 40. It wasn't hard to spot. The ward was divided into several distinct areas. Bed 12 was in the furthest of these, easily identifiable because of the policewoman sitting on a chair beside it, flicking through a magazine. Ion appeared to be asleep, or unconscious. He was hooked up to a drip, along with a machine that monitored his heartbeat. I guessed he'd lost a lot of blood. We need to distract her, I said. Edward chewed his lip. All right. Wait here. You'll only have 5 minutes. Okay. I backed away, hiding behind a large laundry bin on wheels, aware of a couple of other patients watching me suspiciously, while Edward hurried up to the policewoman and began to wave his arms about. He gestured frantically for her to follow him. She hesitated, looked at Ion, then made her mind up and followed Edward towards the exit of the ward. As soon as they'd gone past me, I approached the bed. I wanted to pull the curtain around for privacy but feared this would attract attention, plus I wouldn't be able to see anyone coming. Ion's torso was wrapped in bandages and his breathing was ragged, his face pale and sweaty. There was a vicious purple bruise around one eye and more bandages on his head. Looking down at him, I experienced a surge of hatred. But I was glad he was still alive. There had been so much death, so much blood. Ion, by some miracle, had survived. And now he had a chance to make amends. I put my hand on his shoulder, it was cold and damp, and shook him. He stirred, wincing as he came out of sleep. But he didn't open his eyes. I tried again and, leaning close to his ear, whispered his name. I was aware of time ticking away. Either the policewoman or a nurse or doctor could appear at any moment. Ion, I whispered again, and he opened one eye. It took him a moment to focus. I guessed he would have been given heavy painkillers, but they couldn't completely eradicate the soreness from the beating he'd received. I'm lucky, he said. I had to lean closer to hear him. I have a hard head. He laughed, which brought on another coughing fit. He screwed up his face in agony. My ribs. I need you to concentrate, I said. Laura and a baby, completely innocent baby, are missing. I need you to answer some questions. He looked at me through half-closed eyes, a small smile on his lips. Perhaps the painkillers made him feel high. Or maybe he found this whole situation amusing. The old man who attacked you, was this him? I held up my phone to show him the photo of Nikolai Gabor. Ion nodded almost imperceptibly. So that confirmed it. Gabor was here. Everything was connected to what we'd seen in that house. Was he part of your gang? Were you working for him? He laughed, making a hissing noise, pain shooting across his face. The old man. I never saw him before. Don't lie, Ion. He frowned with confusion. He was there, on the train. He was the old guy that Alina helped. With his luggage. Helped with his. Single quote. Realization dawned on Ion's face. Oh my God. I didn't recognize him. I didn't remember. I believed him. Unless Ion was lying about the old man asking if Ion remembered him, it had to be the truth. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Gabor had been on the train. We had been kicked off close to his house. That couldn't be a coincidence. He must have arranged it in some way. I would work it out later. Right now, there were things I needed confirmed. What happened on the train, Ion? You planted drugs in my and Laura's backpacks. Pain flickered across his face. You found it. The cocaine. I ignored this. And then you sent Camellia to try to find out. What happened to the cocaine? Yes. You know, he coughed. It would have been a lot easier if we'd done what Camellia wanted to do after we checked your bank account. There were no big deposits, so we were sure you either still had the coke or the cash from selling it. Camellia was all for us crashing into your place then and there, tie you up, stick a knife in your face, force you to tell us where the coke was, what you'd done with it. He shook his head. But I'm not a violent man, Daniel. He tapped the side of his head, and winced. I use my wits, not my fists. We never had the cocaine, Ion. I didn't even know for certain that I was right until you just confirmed it. We left our backpacks in Romania, with the cocaine still inside, I assume, at the police station. With a cop called Constantine. Ion's eyes widened. That bastard. I heard a noise at the other end of the ward. A middle-aged man calling for a nurse. I didn't have long. I needed to get to the point. Ion, do you know where they are? Who? Laura and the baby. And Alina. Confusion flickered on his face again. Did Gabor say anything about them? No. He coughed. He was too busy beating me with an iron bar to stop for a chat. He didn't say anything about taking Laura and Alina. Why do you keep talking about Alina? Because. What do you mean, why do I keep asking? I haven't seen Alina since that night. He rolled his head and stared at me, his eyes opening a fraction more. My mouth gaped open. You didn't know she was here. If he hadn't seen her since the train, he wouldn't know what had happened to her. And right now, I didn't have time to tell him. What happened after you were thrown off the train? He asked. You came home, but where did Alina go? I didn't reply. I was too busy thinking. I still didn't know who had taken Laura and Oscar. A sickening thought hit me. What if Alina had taken them? Alina, seeking revenge because Laura and I had left her in that house. Or maybe Alina knew Gabor was after them, and they were hiding. But why take the baby? Edward and the policewoman were still absent, but a nurse had come into view. She was standing with her back to me, but could turn round at any moment. If she saw me, she would throw me out. I have to go, I said. This visit had been a waste of time, even though Ion had confirmed my theory about the drugs. I still couldn't remember where I'd seen Gabor, and Ion was no help. There was a question that had been bugging me for ages. I decided to ask Ion before I went. Why did you and Camelia return my laptop? I asked. We didn't. I bought myself a nice new one with your card, but Camelia had your old one. So she returned it. No. She sold it. But it ended up back in my flat. It's the same computer. Ion gave me a blank look. Who did she sell it to? I asked quickly. The nurse had turned around and was walking towards us, a stern expression on her face. Ion thought about it for an agonizingly long moment. The nurse was almost at the bed. Some old guy she met at the pole dancing club. She sold your PS4 and iPad to him too. She was laughing about the idea of this old guy playing Call of Duty. I interrupted him. The old man she sold my laptop to, was it Gabor? I don't know. I never saw him. But he was Romanian, like us. That's all. I know. Excuse me, you're not allowed to be here. The nurse folded her arms across her chest, tapped her foot. One moment. I grabbed Ion's arm. His skin felt cool, clammy. The nurse moved towards me. Are you sure? Yes. I remember now. She said she sold it to a man who had been harassing her at work. She said it was a weird coincidence. The day after we came to your flat, he asked her if she knew anyone with a laptop for sale, because he needed one. No such thing as coincidences, I thought. It must be Gabor. He must have been watching her. Saw her come out of my flat. Single quote. I really must ask you to leave, the nurse said. I'm about to call security. I looked up at her, so stunned by what Ion had said about the laptop that I could hardly see her. But I became aware of another person walking towards us. The policewoman. And behind her, Edward, gesturing for me to come. I jumped up from the plastic chair, ducked past the nurse, swerved around the policewoman before she could challenge me and grabbed Edward's arm, thumping the door release button with my palm and pulling him out into the corridor. We ran down the steps, our footsteps echoing dully behind us. What did you tell the policewoman? I asked. He waved a hand. Oh, that I'd just seen someone steal an old lady's bag. I led her on a wild goose chase through the hospital. I am going to be in so much shit if they find out what we were up to. You know I rely on the police in my work. Do you want to know what Ion told me? We reached the bottom of the stairs and headed through the lobby. My laptop. Camellia didn't return it to my flat, she sold it to Gabor. He stopped walking. What? He must have returned it. How did he get a key to my flat? Jesus, it's like every fucking body had a key. Half of fucking Romania was waltzing in and out. Why would he return it? Edward asked as we exited the hospital. You checked it for spyware, didn't you? When it first reappeared. Yes. But. Oh shit. What? I broke into a run towards the car. Chapter 57. Laura stared out at the motorway. Since leaving London they had driven in what was pretty much a straight line, through Essex, the devil sticking to the fast lane whenever he could, the speedometer nudging 100 mph. Then they hit traffic and the devil hissed and cursed, rhythmically rapping the steering wheel with his knuckles as the car crawled forward. Oscar, thank God, was asleep, his face against her chest, occasionally making a little snuffling noise that broke her heart. He had cried himself to sleep as they left London, the devil growing increasingly irritated. Laura had rocked and shushed the baby, telling the devil the baby needed milk, that he was hungry. There'll be milk when we get there, he said. He's breastfed, she dared to say. He won't drink formula. The devil snorted. He'll soon drink it if he's hungry. He turned and looked through the gap in the seats, staring blatantly at her chest, making her skin creep. He wouldn't get much of a meal from those. Good hips though. Healthy, physically at least. Your tits will grow when the time comes. Alina sat in silence through all of this, staring straight ahead. Like she really was a ghost, an apparition. Laura could smell her though. Stale sweat. The stink of fear coming from her pores. Not a ghost. Real. And if Alina was real flesh and blood, it followed that the old man driving the car was not a supernatural being either. He was just a man. They were stuck in traffic for a long time, the old man's impatience growing every minute. At one point, Laura thought he was going to get out and punch the car in front. Finally, they started moving again. Laura counted the cat's eyes in the road to calm herself down. When she was a child she would play a game where she would count white cars and red cars on family trips. If red cars outnumbered white, something bad would happen, she would fall ill, one of the girls who bullied her at school would be extra vicious. If white won, something good would occur, her mum would leave her alone for a day, Beatrice would visit her. There was no point counting cars today. The worst had happened. She had resigned herself to it. Her only hope now was that she could protect Oscar. If she could somehow persuade this old man to return him to Aaron and Rob, she would do whatever the devil asked. She would accept her punishment. They turned off the M11 and skirted past Bishop Stortford, heading further east. Laura saw a sign for Hatfield Forest and soon they were turning onto a quieter road, then another, lined by jagged trees. The beam of the headlights illuminated them as they reached out towards the car with bare, spindly branches. Beyond the headlights' beam lay the deepest, blackest night. They headed further into the forest. Laura clamped her eyes shut, held Oscar against her. She could hardly breathe. The car slowed and she opened an eye, saw that they were approaching a large house half concealed by ancient trees. Oscar squealed and she realized she had squeezed him. Beside her, Alina looked equally stricken. The ghost of a ghost. The car drew to a halt outside the house and the devil killed the engine, leaving the headlights shining. Laura could hear Alina breathing. Strangely, witnessing the Romanian woman's fear made her feel braver, forced her to assume the role of the strong one. The car's lights revealed a period house with white painted walls, a house that had stood here for such a long time that it felt like an organic part of the forest. It appeared to be in some disrepair, cracks in the window, the roof sagging in places. There were no other houses in sight. Just like home, the old man said. He grinned at Laura, then turned his attention to Alina. Although his accent was thick, he spoke perfect English, like someone who had been studying it for a long time. You thought you'd escaped me, didn't you? Alina refused to look at him. Remember when I came to take little, what did you call him, Luca away? We should have killed you then. Drajos was growing weak, as was his seed. Unless it's you who are barren. His smile was cruel. We shall soon see. I'm going to do the job myself now. He rubbed his groin. Still life in this old dog. Laura thought she might vomit. She struggled to make sense of what the man was saying. But it was clear he was connected to the house, that terrible place. The man shifted his gaze to Oscar, forcing Laura to focus on the present moment. This one will fetch an excellent price. I already know a couple who will be interested. A Russian couple, old acquaintances, who've moved to London. Too old to have a baby themselves now. Laura heard Alina whimper. Or had she made the noise herself? She wrapped her arms protectively around the baby. What are you talking about? It was cold in the car now. The engine was off, and the man's breath plumed as he spoke. There was a gleam in his eyes that chilled Laura more than his words. He had the air of someone who believes himself to be invincible. Your friend here killed my son. A bastard, but still, my son. She ruined everything. You know how long we lived in that house, happily running our business. 24 years. Since I was forced to flee my job because of the fucking revolution. Alina looked up at that point, her mouth slightly open, revealing the gap in her front teeth. Before that, it was a good time to be a policeman. A powerful position. So many women. He said this wistfully, and went on, entranced by his own story. Most of the babies that I fathered went to the orphanages, but when Dragos's mother became pregnant I was starting to think about my legacy. When the baby turned out to be a boy I decided to keep him. The mother was a big mouth, never knowing when to shut this. He pointed at his own thin lips. So, after she died, I bought the old house in Hunadora and sent Drajos to live there with my mother, God rest her soul. She raised him. And then, years later, at the same time Drajos came of age, the revolution happened. And I disappeared. His eyes shone in the darkness. Laura was reminded, in a perverse way, of her granddad, who never passed up the chance to reminisce. It was boring at first. So dull, after all the excitement of my job. But then one day, when Drajos was a teenager, something wonderful happened. Can you guess? He looked from Laura to Alina and back, then gave a disgusted grunt. No imagination. A pair of hikers appeared at our house. A young man and woman, lost in the forest, like Hansel and Gretel. They came to the door, asking for directions. So I strangled him and then Drajos and I had fun with the girl. It was about time Drajos lost his virginity. He paused. I can't remember if we made Hansel watch while we screwed Gretel. But anyway, I decided to keep her, so we finally had something to entertain us. It was fun. Laura swallowed hard. Oscar wriggled again on her lap. And then, he said, as if he was growing tired of the story, Gretel became pregnant. Maybe my baby, maybe Dragos's. I was going to kill her but then had an idea. A stroke of genius. We were running out of money. And I was so bored, even with a nice young girl to fuck. I went back to some old contacts, people who had clung to their wealth. And the rest, as the saying goes, is history. Alina spoke up, making Laura jump. You're a monster too. Like your son. He laughed. She speaks. No. I am a businessman. There is a demand, so I supply it. Laura reached out and took Alina's hand, squeezing it gently. After a moment's hesitation, Alina squeezed back. You have spirit, I'll give you that, he said to Alina. I knew you would come here, to England. Because you wanted revenge, didn't you? He pointed at Laura. She wanted revenge against you, for going without her. For leaving her to rot. Isn't that right, Alina? The Romanian woman cast her eyes downwards. She didn't reply. Constantine, that fuck, lied to me. You witnessed it, Alina. He blatantly lied, because he didn't want me to know about the drugs he'd found in your backpack, Laura. He paid the price for that. I buried him in the forest. The last thing he said, thinking the information would save him, was your and your boyfriend's names. He reached out and stroked Oscar's downy hair. This little one wasn't part of my plan. He's a bonus. Another sign from God. He stroked the baby's head again and Laura fought the urge to snatch Oscar away, to cover him with her body. I was excited to find the baby in your care, Laura, his parents asleep in their bed. Laura hugged Oscar against her. She had been trying to work out why the old man had taken her back to Aaron and Rob's after finding her in that squat. She had thought it must be because he was targeting the baby, but if he now spoke of Oscar as a bonus.